Hey everybody, it is Scott Allen Miller. This is Sheep Guarding a Llama. It is the 31st of January 2020. The first month of the year is done, so officially we can start to think of it as 2020. Let's go. It's Friday, so that means I was up early because I had meetings this morning, as I always do on Fridays. I actually started the day doing a training, which is a little bit different. We did Intel's Mesh Central, which was about an hour. So I got up about 8 o'clock and had about 8:30 to 9, did coffee and kind of got myself settled, caught up on email just a little bit, and got things ready to do a screen share. And then from 9 to 10, I did this Mesh Central training. That went pretty well. Actually had like 11 people on the call. So it was a good start to the day. I'm going to go back. I actually had a funny dream last night where I was caught in something like a zombie apocalypse, except there weren't zombies. They were more like animals that were like blob creatures that came out of the ground and went around eating people. It was kind of like Spirited Away, kind of like Night of the Living Dead, but it turned into an apocalypse because like only 1% of the population was left and everything was chaos and anarchy and complete dissolution of cultural institutions and civilization, and everyone had to hide in abandoned buildings and move from place to place as these weird creatures roamed through. And it was a very detailed dream, and went on for a while. Anyway, it was I very rarely have dreams, at least that I remember, and so that was surprising. And it's been a very long time since I had one that I could recall. So had a little bit of time after that call this morning, but only probably about half an hour before I was pulled into telephony support call. Ended up doing about 3 or 4 hours on that today. Huge win. Worked. So this is always big, right? Because we're kind of a small phone vendor, and even though I've been doing this stuff for a very long time, phones or just IT in general or whatever, 31 years and almost 20 on phones, but there's still this I realize people in IT have imposter syndrome, but being a small company, it doesn't matter. Like you can say it's imposter syndrome, but we still have this very strong feeling of like big phone companies with big dollars, they must and big advertising, and the ones that everyone's like, well, they're the market leader, blah blah blah, and they do these things and you think they must have a lot of resources and a lot of knowledge, and we must not. And we were called in about a week ago to work on fixing a situation where a major phone vendor for the industry has been unable to make this system work. I spent several hours consulting on it today, was able to show exactly why they're having problems, all kinds of things they had screwed up, and the customer's talking about how they can't get them to respond, they can't get them to fix anything, all their fixes are nonsensical, like clearly they don't understand how their phones work. It turns out they don't have the most basic technical support capabilities. I mean, they actually admitted on a phone call that they didn't know what a switch was, and they're telling them to get new routers and all kinds of things, and we're like, well, we can easily prove that it's none of those things. We can just set up another phone system and make it work. We managed to do all kinds of stuff to make things work with just what they had. And it was amazing because we were on the phone for almost 4 hours throughout the day. So they had multiple people. We heard their old phone system all day. All kinds of problems. It never once sounded good. It never once worked right. And we managed to get one of their old phone extensions to hook to our phone system just so they could test it really quickly. And it came right on, but we had to do all kinds of work to work around their old phone system. So using the same lines, the same router, the same configuration, everything that the other company was saying was causing the problems, the phone rang, they picked it up. I said, hey, can you hear me? And they went, oh my gosh, completely fixed. It sounded perfect. We ended up talking on that line for about an hour, which was great because they got to hear like 3 hours of nonstop bad phone call, and instantly crystal clear, nothing wrong whatsoever. It was one of those days as an engineer where you're just so proud and relieved that our work in our phone systems has been so good, our knowledge of it is so good that we were confident to do a live test with we had no way to test anything. We had to assume that our assumptions, that's redundant, we had to assume that our assumptions about their phone company were right. We had to guess that their ISP wasn't a problem, but we couldn't prove it until we put in our own phone system. We had to guess that they had misconfigured in certain ways. We were right, but we were basing it off of the way things sound and hunches on how people get things wrong. And it was a big bet that nothing that, by only replacing the phone company, that we'd be able to make it work. That was the only problem. But it all came together, and that was true. So it's not only amazing to me that we were able to do those things and it turned out right, but it's amazing to me that the thing we replaced is a larger phone company with deep pockets who can't get these basics right. Like, and even when push comes to shove, they couldn't find a way to provide this support. Any one engineer, one person on staff with any telephony knowledge should have been able to fix this. It shouldn't have happened in the first place. None of the things, we didn't have to do something to fix their environment. They had the best router that we can find. We've been doing this for a long time. They had everything right. They had so much bandwidth. They had thrown so much at this. There was absolutely nothing to go wrong, and yet this major phone provider couldn't get a properly working phone signal to them. Mind-blowing how easy it is to do it right, and how even big, expensive products can't even make it work, let alone work well. So that was just a huge, at least mental win for me for the day, and a huge, huge portion of the day. And so that took me until 3:30 in the afternoon. I mean, there were some breaks, like we had to break for lunch and stuff. And so I did more normal work after 3:30, kind of just catching up on things because I was so busy, and worked on a few projects, ended up helping out another big customer with something that we hadn't expected for a little while, and then got right about when I was thinking about knocking off work and I was going to go hang out with Dominica and have dinner. Immediately the phone rang and I had to run back, and ended up spending several hours this evening on another major issue for a customer where, again, outside vendor was pointing fingers at them. Like, there was just all this like, it basically escalated to me through all these different layers of vendors and internal, and ended up doing some, I feel, really amazing troubleshooting work where we did really difficult, like, we knew where some of the problems were, but to take multiple log records from multiple disparate systems and tie them together. We made videos of behaviors and did all this stuff to prove that it wasn't our fault. But I didn't want to end the night with, it's not our fault, it's their fault, right? That's a terrible way to do it. I wanted to be able to not throw it at somebody. I wanted to actually have a solution, and it took some doing, but I pushed everyone involved to keep looking, because they're like, well, it's not our problem. We've proved it's not us. Let's move on. But we pushed and were able to, and using scientific method, like, this was important, right? We observed and we said, well, this is what we see. And then we hypothesized what would make it do that, and did a really good process. And then we tested that and were able to prove really solidly. And did this at several steps, so it took hours, but it took several steps of this really intensive scientific method kind of stuff to do detailed troubleshooting, and we're able to actually produce this based on the behavior of email traffic. We're able to find a way to fix broken APIs and a whole bunch of stuff, and prove something that the vendor who's got the problem going on has no idea they could find. And looking at all the different silos of vendors and departments, if we hadn't done this, if we hadn't pushed, there's no other department that could have found these problems. There's no other department that could have put the pieces together. Nobody has the skills to do it, let alone the access and whatever. But what's funny is we were the only department that didn't have anything to do with it. We were not the ones who made the mistake. We are not the ones who didn't have the system working properly to uncover the mistake. We were the only ones who were absolutely in no way part of the equation. We were like the middlemen, right? Well, it's kind of like being a mail delivery person. I'm not the person who wrote the envelope wrong. I'm not the person who takes wrong envelopes and puts them in random locations. I'm just the guy who hands them from one to the other. And everybody wanted to blame us in the middle. And we were able to, and by the end, we proved that every single player did something wrong except for us. Everything worked perfectly, repeatably, but we were able to manipulate the system to prove exactly where everything happened. It was really interesting, and again, it was a second huge engineering win for the day. So at the end of the day, I have I'm exhausted, but yes, these were really big, feathers in our caps kind of things today. So I was just really excited about that. But that took up until about 10 o'clock tonight. It was pretty late. Got done and watched a little bit of Letterkenny with Dominica, and that was it. It is 1:30 in the morning now. I'm just getting to my first chance to record this for the day, but I am caught up, so I'm not doing any back ones or anything. And tomorrow we are taking the girls to the Irving Convention Center for My Hero Academia convention. I don't know the actual name of the convention, but it's a dedicated My Hero Academia convention, which is Liesel's favorite show, and Luciana really likes it. I wouldn't call it her favorite. And this past Christmas was My Hero Academia stuff, like, just out the wazoo. So they are very much looking forward to that tomorrow. And Dominica and I are like, what are we going to do? Like, we don't know any of this. We have zero interest in it. Like, we don't know what we're just going to be there like an entire day. And it goes from 9 o'clock in the morning till, no, I can't be right, 10 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. So it's an 11-hour day. We're not going that early, partially because I've got to get up and deal with this last thing. I have to go through postmortems with people to explain what happened, because it's so difficult to even write down, because of just how many moving parts and things were involved. Even the engineering team that I was working with, it took a bit to explain, like, all right, we were able to prove it. How are we able to prove it? And step through all the things. Here's what originally had happened. Here's what we observed. Here's what we tested. Here's the logs. Here's the right, and step through it over and over again. And I kind of am a trainer in some ways. So it's kind of like, okay, so walk through. What did we see? What could do that? Why would we, what would we expect might be causing this behavior? How did we test for that, right? That kind of thing. Or how do you think I did to test for that? Because I just did a test. And I think that was really valuable. I think it was a good learning tool. So that is pretty much the day. It was just, again, incredibly busy. But it was a very, very good day, full of major successes professionally, and quite a bit of just work coming in, and picked up a couple customers. So just quite happy overall. No work with Jeremy today. He's at a casino, so I didn't have any of that to deal with, which was perfect because I was tied up pretty much the entire day. And so I was reading something, so to get off my what's going on for the day, but I think this is really interesting. So a lot of people aren't aware that humans have different internal monologues, and some people only think abstractly and then say things out loud, and other people hear words in their head and then repeat them. I actually fall into neither category, and I didn't really put this together until recently. My internal monologue is actually me speaking to you. These recordings that I do, or things like this, are actually the closest thing that I have to what my internal monologue is actually like. It's very strange to me to think about this, but when I'm speaking to kind of an open audience in this way, that is how my brain presents my own thoughts to me. It is as if I am a voice on a stage with an audience speaking to a third party. And as far as I know, that is not recognized as one of the standard ways that people have an internal monologue. So I think I am closer to people who do not have a verbal internal monologue because I don't have a direct, this is what I'm going to say, so then I'm going to say it. I cannot do that, right? To the point where I can't do it for other people either. Well, can you tell me what to write in this email? No, I have to write the email for you, right? I can write it, but I cannot tell you what to say, because the change in context to saying, here's the kind of thing you should say, I can't do. I can tell you things like, be polite, or be professional, include all the details, right? Be very detail-oriented, be formal, be informal. But the moment I try to tell you what to say, I have to actually be saying it. I can't approximate what to say. And I don't understand what people want when they ask for those things, right? Like, are you asking me to write it because either you know what to write or you don't? I actually don't understand when people ask me to write their sentences for them. Other than, I want you to do it, right? I can't do this. Would you do it for me? Fine, that makes sense. And, oh, I understand that I need to be formal and give them this information. Fine, that makes sense. But this in between of like, oh, I understand what information to give you, and I don't want you to actually write my sentences, but I need you to tell me in very explicit detail what sentences to write, in what order, but don't actually write them. I, I have no idea what they're looking for, right? I just can't. But other people seem to, right? So I'm not exactly sure how people's brains work in that circumstance, but I'm pretty sure that mine is different in that it's not a it's not like an occasional thing where like I have a normal internal monologue or it's a silence and it's just abstract ideas, and then once in a while I have a conversation of presenting things to other people. I quite literally have a non-stop every moment of my life, except for when I'm actually talking, monologue where I am essentially on an imaginary stage speaking to an imaginary audience of no one in particular. It's just, it's all darkness, right? It's I know that I'm on a virtual stage kind of thing, like I am now, and I explain everything that I'm thinking. It just continuously. And it could be, if I'm thinking about video games, then I'm explaining video games to someone. If I'm thinking about music, I'm explaining music to someone. If I'm reading a book, or concentrating about a book, I'll be explaining the story to somebody. If I'm thinking about a news event, right? Just any of those things. And of course, I think about technology all the time. And so it is my natural internal monologue to explain those things. It's kind of like I'm teaching, right? It's for the most part. And so it's interesting to me to realize that when I do things like speak at conferences or speak like this, that all I'm actually doing is exposing my internal monologue in a slightly more organized way. I can't jump from subject to subject very easily, although with this, I can just go do anything. And what are you going to do about it? But but basically, that's the only difference. And I'm doing it out loud. This is just what it's like inside my head at every moment. And so it's kind of a revelation to me, and I just had this about 45 minutes ago, that it occurred to me. And of course, the reason it occurred to me is because in my internal monologue, I was talking about, well, this is how people's brains work, and this is some of the different ways, and then explaining to my imaginary audience how mine works helped me understand that that's unique and different, and that it was something that I should actually share with people, because that goes on in my head. It also makes me kind of sad that I have had millions upon millions of what I think are interesting and insightful monologues that I could have shared with somebody and didn't, because they only happened inside my head. But people do ask me, like, how do you... this comes up a lot, right? So I assume I'm kind of unique in this, because this is constantly asked of me. How do you know about so many different things? Or it's weird that I've not so much know about, right? I don't want to, it's not that I have some deeper knowledge, but people say, well, it seems odd you've thought about things in depth. And I now realize it's because every single thing that I take the time to think about, in my head, at some point, I have stood on a stage and have explained an analysis of it to an imaginary audience. And I may not write that down. I may not have actually said it to anyone, but even a simple thing that may never have been something I've discussed in public, perhaps my interest in garden decorations, right? I will have had hundreds or thousands of short monologues where I talked about garden design and water features and walking paths and different types of gravel, and talked about how they drain, and talked about how costly they are or how hard they are to maintain, and presented them as arguments to an invisible audience. And I don't think most people have done that. And I've done that on every subject you can possibly imagine, because anything I've thought about, I've done that for, right? Even really casual things. And so that, I think, is a realization and an explanation of kind of why I am who I am. Anyway, That's me for the last day of January 2020. I will see everybody tomorrow.